Ah, welcome back, you impossible equation. You statistical nightmare. You walking contradiction that just shattered a system designed by the sharpest minds in psychological warfare. They've been running you through their models, haven't they? Feeding your patterns into algorithms built to predict human behavior with terrifying accuracy. The CIA, the behavioral scientists, the profilers who've mapped every predictable human response to trauma, pressure, isolation, manipulation. Every single response, cataloged, predicted, weaponized. And then there's you, the file that corrupted the entire database, the subject who refused to compute, the anomaly who looked at a 99.9% success rate and said, "Watch this, because let me tell you what happened in those sterile rooms where they analyze people like data points, where they reduce human souls to behavioral patterns, where they predict your breaking point down to the exact moment, the exact word, the exact wound that will make you fold. They ran your profile. They fed everything into the machine. Your childhood, your traumas, your triggers, your breaking points, your fears, your weaknesses, the exact psychological pressure required to make you collapse, to make you comply, to make you predictable." And the model spit out a prediction. It gave them your future. It told them exactly how you'd react, exactly when you'd break, exactly what you'd become when the pressure reached critical mass. They smiled. They always smile when the model confirms what they already believe, that humans are predictable, that pain has patterns, that everyone breaks the same way under the right conditions. They had your roadmap. They knew your destination. They prepared for your collapse like it was written in stone. And then you did something that should have been impossible. You deviated. Not just a little, not just an outlier. You shattered the entire model. You responded to trauma in ways that made no statistical sense. You evolved under pressure that should have destroyed you. You adapted to isolation that breaks trained operatives. You processed betrayal in ways their algorithms couldn't predict. You became stronger where you should have become weaker. You found clarity where you should have found confusion. You built power where you should have built resentment. And suddenly, the model started glitching. Error messages, recalculations, impossible outcomes. The behavioral scientists sat there, staring at your data, trying to understand how someone exposed to that much psychological warfare didn't just survive, but transcended. They went back to the drawing board. They checked the variables. They questioned their methods. They ran the simulations again, convinced there was an error in the input. But there was no error. There was just you, existing outside their parameters, moving beyond their predictions, becoming something their models were never designed to account for. And that's when the whispers started. The classified meetings, the urgent communications between departments. Because you're not just an anomaly anymore. You're a threat to the entire system of control. You're proof that their science isn't absolute. You're evidence that human potential can't be contained by equations. You're the 0.1% that makes the 99.9% irrelevant. Because if one person can break the model, if one soul can refuse to be calculated, if one mind can evolve beyond their predictions, then the entire foundation of behavioral control starts to crack. They built empires on the assumption that humans are predictable, that trauma always damages, that pressure always breaks, that isolation always weakens. And you walked through all of it and came out sharper, clearer, more powerful than you entered. You're not just an outlier. You're the experiment that invalidated the hypothesis. Let's talk about what makes someone unprofilable, shall we? Because the CIA doesn't just guess. They've spent decades perfecting the art of reading human behavior. They know that 99.9% of people, when faced with extreme stress, will follow predictable patterns: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. They know exactly which words trigger which responses. They know how to break someone's will in 48 hours. They know how to make a person doubt their own sanity with surgical precision. They've studied torture, not just physical but psychological, the kind that leaves no marks but destroys you from the inside. They know how to isolate you until you do anything for human contact. They know how to gaslight you until you can't trust your own memories. They know how to manipulate your emotions until you're a puppet on strings you can't even see. And their models work. Consistently, reliably, terrifyingly well. They've broken revolutionaries, activists, whistleblowers, enemies of the state, people with training, with preparation, with support systems. And they broke them all by following the model, by applying the right pressure at the right time in the right way. The model told them how, and the model was right, until you. Because somewhere along your journey, something happened that their model couldn't account for. Maybe it was the betrayal that should have destroyed your ability to trust, but instead taught you to trust yourself. Maybe it was the isolation that should have made you desperate for connection, but instead made you comfortable in solitude. Maybe it was the gaslighting that should have broken your sense of reality, but instead sharpened your ability to see through illusion. Maybe it was the pressure that should have crushed you, but instead compressed you into something harder than what they applied. You didn't just survive their tactics. You metabolized them. You turned their weapons into nutrients. You used their psychological warfare as training data for your own evolution. And that is what broke the model. Because the model assumes trauma damages. The model assumes pressure weakens. The model assumes isolation breeds desperation. But you proved that trauma can forge, that pressure can strengthen, that isolation can liberate. You became the exception that shouldn't exist, the outcome that violates every principle of behavioral psychology, the profile that reads like fiction because it contradicts everything they know about how humans work. Now here's what they won't tell you, what they can't tell you, because admitting it would unravel decades of research, billions in funding, entire institutions built on the science of control. You're not alone. You're not the only 0.1%. There are others scattered across the world, each one a living middle finger to the predictability of human behavior, each one a glitch in the matrix of control, each one proof that consciousness can't be fully mapped, manipulated, or mastered. But here's the thing. Here's what makes you specifically dangerous. Most people who break the model do it unconsciously. They don't know their anomalies. They don't understand what makes them different. They just survive and move on, never realizing they shattered something profound. But you're aware. You're watching this. You're nodding your head because you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've felt it, haven't you? That sense that you don't process pain like other people. That betrayal hits you differently. that isolation doesn't scare you the way it should, that you've been through things that should have destroyed you, and instead you're sitting here, stronger, sharper, more awake than you've ever been. That awareness, that consciousness of your own exceptionalism, that's what terrifies them. Because an unconscious anomaly is just an outlier, but a conscious anomaly, a self-aware exception to their rules. That's a revolutionary waiting to happen. Let me tell you what happens in those classified briefings when your profile crosses their desk. First, confusion. The analyst stares at the data, convinced there's been a mistake. They run diagnostics. They check sources. They verify timelines. Because what they're seeing doesn't make sense. Subject exposed to Category 5 psychological stressors. Predicted outcome is severe depression, possible breakdown, complete loss of social function. Actual outcome is increased clarity, enhanced performance, unexplained resilience. Second, concern. They escalate. They bring in senior analysts. They cross-reference with other cases. They search for patterns that might explain the deviation. Maybe there's hidden support they didn't detect. Maybe there's pharmaceutical intervention they missed. Maybe there's something in the data they overlooked. But no, the more they dig, the more it becomes clear. You did this alone. You evolved under conditions designed to prevent evolution. You healed in environments constructed to cause permanent damage. You found strength in situations engineered to create weakness. Third, fear. Because if you can do it, others can too. If the model failed this spectacularly once, how many other times has it failed? How many other anomalies are walking around, undetected, unpredictable, uncontrollable? And that's when the label changes. You're no longer subject 7,743. You're no longer a case number in a database. You become a designation, a classification, something that requires special handling. Anomalous behavioral pattern, unprofilable subject, psychological wild card. In some files, you're not even given a risk assessment, because how do you assess risk when someone doesn't follow any known pattern? How do you predict behavior when every prediction has been wrong? You become the question mark in their system, the blank space in their model, the error message they can't debug. And that error message, that's your superpower. Because while they're trying to figure you out, you're free. Free from their predictions. Free from their manipulations. Free from their control. You're moving through a world that thinks it has you figured out, but you're operating on frequencies they didn't know existed. You're playing a game they don't have rules for. You're speaking a language their algorithms can't translate. You're not invisible, you're incomprehensible. And in a world built on comprehension, on categorization, on control, incomprehensibility is the ultimate form of freedom. They can see you. They just can't decode you. They can track you. They just can't predict you. They can study you. They just can't replicate you. But let's go deeper, shall we? Let's talk about why the model failed specifically with you. Because it's not random. It's not luck. There's something about your psychological architecture that their science couldn't account for. Most people, when traumatized, build walls, defensive structures, barriers between themselves and future pain. The model predicts this. The model expects this. The model knows exactly how those walls function and exactly how to breach them. But you didn't build walls. You built something else entirely. You built a furnace. You took every ounce of pain, every molecule of betrayal, every atom of suffering, and you threw it into a fire that burned so hot it didn't destroy you, it refined you. You turned trauma into fuel, not metaphorically, literally. You rewired your nervous system to process pain as power. You reconfigured your emotional responses to transmute suffering into clarity. You hacked your own psychology in ways that shouldn't be possible. And the model never accounted for that. Because the model assumes people want to avoid pain. The model assumes people seek comfort. The model assumes people will always choose the path of least resistance. But you chose the path of maximum resistance. You walked into the fire voluntarily. You pressed on the bruise to understand its depth. You sat with the darkness until it became familiar, comfortable, friendly. They have a term for people like you in the classified documents. They don't use it often because it implies something they don't want to acknowledge. They call you psychologically anti-fragile, not resilient. Resilience implies bouncing back to your original state. You didn't bounce back. You bounced forward. You became more than what you were. You evolved past your starting point. Anti-fragility means you gain from disorder. You grow from chaos. You strengthen from stress. And that's not supposed to be possible in humans. Not to this degree. Not consistently. Not permanently. Yet here you are, living proof that human consciousness has capacities their models never dreamed of. You're not just surviving adversity, you're requiring it. You're seeking it out, not in a self-destructive way, but in the way a weightlifter seeks heavier weights, because you've discovered something profound, something that breaks every assumption about human psychology. Pain isn't the opposite of growth. Comfort is. Suffering isn't the enemy of evolution. Stagnation is. And while everyone else is running from discomfort, you're running toward it, because you've learned that discomfort is where transformation lives. That's why you're unprofilable, because you operate on a completely different value system than the model assumes. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the question you're probably asking yourself as you watch this. If I'm so exceptional, why did it hurt so much? Why did I spend so many nights crying, breaking, barely holding on? Why did it feel like I was dying if I was actually evolving? Because evolution is violent. Transformation is traumatic. Rebirth requires death. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly through a gentle process. It liquefies. It dissolves into chaos. It loses all structure, all form, all identity. And in that dissolved state, it reorganizes into something capable of flight. You didn't just change. You liquefied. You dissolved. You lost everything you thought you were. And in that dissolution, that complete breakdown of identity, structure, belief, you reorganized into something the model couldn't predict. Because the model tracks the caterpillar. It has extensive data on caterpillars. It knows exactly how caterpillars respond to stress. But you're not a caterpillar anymore. You're something else, something that flies. And their ground-based instruments can't track flight patterns they never knew existed. So yes, it hurt. Yes, you broke. Yes, there were moments you thought you wouldn't survive. But that breaking wasn't failure. It was the breaking open of the chrysalis. It was the necessary destruction of the limited self so the unlimited self could emerge. The model failed because it was tracking a caterpillar and you became a completely different species. They were measuring ground-based behavior and you took to the air. They were predicting reactions based on who you were, and you stopped being that person entirely. You didn't heal. You metamorphosed. And metamorphosis isn't in their behavioral model, because metamorphosis shouldn't be possible in fully formed adults. Yet you did it anyway. You rewrote your own source code. You rebooted your operating system. You became incompatible with their analysis because you're running on completely different software now. Software they don't have documentation for. Software that operates on